everyone. Welcome to the panel on standards schemas as a key tool to operationalize AI regulatory compliance. I'm Ashley Casavan, the Executive Director of the Responsible AI Institute, and I'm very excited to be here today to have a great discussion with subject matter experts from all across the world, from industry, from standards development organizations, that are really interested in understanding the key concepts related to how AI governance can be supported related to advancing responsible AI objectives for the appropriate oversight of AI systems. I'm really looking forward to introducing the panelists, but will provide a very brief presentation on the efforts related to this panel and some of the key objectives, and that will help to situate the conversation today. So just as a brief background, the efforts that we're doing the work that we're doing is at the Responsible AI Institute is to develop a certification program for the responsible oversight of AI systems. And so this panel discussion is very near to me in terms of how we can think through some of the implications from AI systems. And this really stems from the work that I started at the Government of Canada, where I helped to lead the development of the Directive on Automated Decision-Making Systems. And what was really interesting during that time is when we were thinking about the key objectives of how we would like these systems to function, making sure that they were done in a fair way, making sure that they were done in a way that was transparent and accountable, that people were aware that AI systems were being used for their services. It was quite interesting to see that different types of systems had different implications, and therefore some of the challenges that we came across was really trying to identify what does good look like? What are we really trying to achieve when we're trying to put standards or oversight mechanisms on these systems? And so this was in 2018. At the time, there were many, many different types of discussions, reports, and various different research tools that were available from some of the experts that are on this panel today and the organizations that they represent, as well as other international organizations, including IEEE, OECD, et cetera, that were really starting to understand the use of these systems, and then also how they have some potential risks, unintended, or just not really not understanding what the end-to-end implication would be if a human wasn't involved in that process. And so from that perspective, fast forward a couple of years, there's been several efforts, including from those organizations, and again, the subject matter experts that you'll meet on the panel today, that have been spending a lot of effort to really articulate, based on those different types of use cases, and again, we'll hear some examples, how exactly we should provide oversight so that we can achieve the appropriate objectives for thinking through how to protect consumers, how to increase explainability and transparency of these systems, and make sure that they're accountable both to the public and to the people that are operating them. Within our efforts at the Responsible AI Institute, the idea of a certification to help to support public governance perspectives and policies that are being developed, which again we'll discuss, was really trying to understand how can we take all of these different types of desired outcomes and really think about how we can put them into a simple, unified framework that will really help practitioners that are responsible for building these systems know exactly what to do in a very simple way. And so one of the mechanisms that you'll hear about quite a bit, and you've seen in the description, are called conformity assessments, and Pierre and others will get into a more significant discussion related to it. I won't go through all of the lines in this diagram, but really what I wanted to share is that these are some of the terms that you will hear raised during our discussion today. And I wanted to just identify that it's quite a significantly large community in terms of the different types of perspectives and stakeholders that we need to bring together in order to identify what those objectives are that we're trying to achieve, how we can establish best practices through organizations like civil society groups, but also research labs at companies that are situated within specific industries that can give real-time and real-life feedback so that we're not creating objectives that are not in line with what practitioners are capable of actually achieving. And through that, the key objective of the conformity assessments, which is really a set of controls that help to, as I'm mentioning, situate what our desired outcomes are and how we can have a common conformity against those, will really come to help to address and achieve some of the objectives that we have as individual organizations to ensure that AI systems are safe and fair for everybody. Ultimately, we can use a lot of different types of technologies. We'll hear about some of those practices related to testing and evaluation organizations that can help to use statistical tools or different types of modeling techniques to evaluate different aspects of these systems. So one of the interesting things about thinking about standards now as they apply to AI is that we can actually use aspects of AI to help with that evaluation. And then ultimately, we'll hear more about the different types of auditing practices and how that fits in to the entire workflow or process associated with the oversight. And one of the things that we're really keen on at the Responsible AI Institute is then having a symbol that demonstrates to the public or to consumers that there's been an effective evaluation of these tools, and that comes in the format of a certification mark or kite marks. And this is something also that Emmanuel and others are thinking through, and so we'll hear more about that. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen, and I really would love to take the opportunity to invite you to our panelists for today. First and foremost, we have Marc Etienne, who leads global AI policy at AWS and brings a strong industry perspective, both in his current role and previous work. We have Pierre Bilodeau, who's the Vice President of Strategy and Stakeholder Engagement at the Standards Council of Canada. We have Florian Osman, who's the Head of AI Governance and Regulatory Innovation at the Alan Turing Institute for the UK AI Standards Hub. And then finally, last but not least, Dr. Emmanuel Kamwabi, who is the Chief AI Architect at VDE and is the CEO at VDE UK. And really excited to hear more about each of their backgrounds. So to get us started, I would love for each of the panelists to introduce themselves in the order in which I presented you. And please share a few words as to why you believe that standards are an important part of AI governance.
Well, I'll start, I guess. Hi, everyone. My name is Marc Etienne. We met. Feel free to call me Marc. Like Ashley said, I lead global AI policy for Amazon Web Services, and we are pretty deeply involved in the standards world and standards community. In fact, the AIML standards team reports into our team within AWS. The fundamental reason why we are so involved in standards is because obviously we see forthcoming regulation being informed by standards, or at least the conformity process by which one will be able to sell and distribute AI products in given jurisdictions. And so it's important to get those standards right and correct, not just for ourselves, but for the thousands of customers that operate leveraging AWS technology. And so while we have a probably a few years before we're faced with those formal conformity assessments as part of regulatory practices. Right now is a time where we need to figure out how we operationalize that just to be able to scale even our compliance efforts as a company for our customers and make sure that it is as seamless as possible to deploy rights respecting artificial intelligence.
Thank you. Pierre, over to you.
Thanks, Ashley. Hello, everybody. As we said, my name is Pierre Bilodeau. I work with the Standard Council of Canada. So SCC, I will call the Standard Council like this. We are Canada's national standard body, and we're also the national accreditation body for Canada. In my current role, I help advance Canadian priorities by leading the development of standardization strategies, provide standardization-related policy and regulatory affairs to all levels of government. And as we know, depending on the jurisdiction that you are in Canada, we deal with federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal government. So it's we need to keep all of those key stakeholders in the loop because AI does have an impact across all of them. I must, however, give one aspect. The Standard Council of Canada, we do not develop standards on our own. We, in fact, encourage our 14 different standard development organizations in Canada to do so, and we facilitate international trade to help break down barriers and provide a fair level playing field across Canadian businesses. Why do I believe standards are important part of AI governance? Well, the global AI partnership that we all are part of today is certainly of utmost importance to us in my organization, as it aims to facilitate international collaboration and reduce duplication. As we all know, AI is a very complex field. It encompasses many different technologies and is very cross-cutting, engaging all different stakeholders. Therefore, developing a governance of AI is very important. And it would be very beneficial to all that is required to take into account all the many different biases that the technology entails. And as we all know, there are many of those biases. So finally, to unlock the potential of AI for all, standards can be a very useful tools. And as somebody mentioned to me in the past, standards are there to regulate, to direct, and when they're well developed, they are very effective. But the best way to see whether a standard is useful or not is if you develop a bad standard, then you'll have a lot of problem for a longer time. So we have to be very careful not to do harm when we do those standards. They have the potential to engage all stakeholders. We've said before, they provide a full for transparency, consensus-based, trustworthy, and secure. So, and hopefully they engage a lot of people, and we get a consensus from various places. So thank you.
Thank you. Florian, over to you.
Thank you, Ashley, and hello, everyone. My name is Florian Ostmann. I'm a member of staff at the Alan Turing Institute. The Alan Turing Institute is the UK's National Institute for Data Science and AI. And within the institute, I lead a team that's focused on the regulation of AI, but also other governance mechanisms that relate to AI. And standards are, of course, one important example of those other governance mechanisms. As part of that work, I lead the Turing's efforts on the AI Standards Hub. The AI Standards Hub is a new UK initiative dedicated to AI standardization, and I'm sure we'll be able to come back and I'll be able to tell you a bit more about that initiative as we go through the discussion. Very briefly on the question of why I think standards are important, I agree with all the points that have been made already. I think broadly speaking, if we look at the landscape internationally of AI governance, we've seen a lot of progress in the recent years, but it's also clear that there are important sort of step changes that are needed. And some of them have been mentioned. Marc Etienne mentioned the need to really think about operationalizing best practice, moving from principles to concrete guidelines and best practice definitions. There's a need, obviously, to achieve as much as possible international coherence and consensus around best practice. And it's very important to include all different forms of expertise that are relevant to defining best practice. As Pierre just mentioned, that expertise can be found across different stakeholder groups. And so standards as a tool, I think, can play a key role in addressing all three of those challenges, sort of operationalizing best practice, bringing in different forms of expertise, and trying to achieve international coherence.
Great, thank you. Emmanuel.
Hello, I'm Emmanuel Kahembwe. I lead the UK division of VDE, and VDE as a whole, I guess it's an organization that's been around for a long time. It's 130 years old, founded in 1893, with a mandate to initially make sure that electricity is safe in Europe, but that's generalized in general to electrical products and anything electrical in nature. The way that this took form 130 years ago was that electricity was the new thing that industry was getting used to, and VDE took it upon itself to help convene industry and guide industry through adoption of electricity as the main backbone of power of energy, and at the same time also engaged governments and legislative bodies in how to actually communicate, let's say, social values and things that we desire through what is now we call standards. And it's been doing this now consistently for 130 years, spanning all the different technologies that have developed throughout time, all the way to when we're involved in everything from the electrical grids all the way to telecommunications, 3G, 4G, 5G, 6G. And now we're also in the digital realm where we're dealing with AI standardization and reliving our origin story here, because again, we have a new technology. It's very pervasive. Everyone is using it, so to speak, or everybody wants to use it. And again, we're in the process of, let's say, kind of guiding the conversation on this first, primarily in Europe, given that VDE is headquartered in Germany, but then also through several chairmanships within the standardization world, including at IEC and at Sensenelec. We are also kind of steering the conversation at both the European and international level. And the reason why I guess standards are important is because, first of all, they allow us to agree on a common language by which we refer to a technology. Because right now, again, with a topic like AI, very many people use the term and mean different things. And so when it comes to even thinking about how to think about safety of this topic and how to use it, responsibly, that first step is literally getting on a common ground. And then there's all the talk about governance and the tools of governance. And that is also a parallel discussion to be had. And then how to translate the tools of governance into things that are actually useful in the real world, that people can actually follow. This is also a separate discussion, but they all need to be coordinated such that in the end, when you do develop these tools and you do have this language, in the end, it benefits society, as in the end user and the companies that use AI technologies can actually actively use them within their daily operations. And I have to say that that's probably where VDE sits comfortably in having a history of doing this. And yeah, I think that's what I have. Yeah.
That sounds great. And I think that's a really good segue into the beginning of our discussion. I would love, building off of Emmanuel, what you just shared, and then Marc-Etienne, for you to contribute to this as well, since I think both of you both either represent industry or work closely with industry. Can you please help to, as we get into this discussion, help to shape the key challenges for us? We've heard from everybody about why they think standards are important. We've shared some of the challenges related to bias in these systems, lack of transparency, etc. How do you think that standards helped us, and what do, in particular, industry and practitioners need? And so maybe Marc-Etienne, I'll start with you, and then Emmanuel, go back to you.
Well, I think in a nutshell, we need further precision. We just thinking back of the last 5-6 years I've spent in the AI policy space. It feels like we're a plane that's circling above an airport, trying to slowly make it down to ultimately land. We started with extremely generic ethical AI principles. We've been moving on towards more concrete forms of regulations and legislation. Those tend to refer to the need for specific standards to define concepts like robustness and trustworthiness and risk management and so on. And then in the standard space, we're at a space now, or a level now, where we're getting a further degree of refinement. But still, even if you take something like ISO 42001's AI risk management system approach, it's still fairly high level. There's good and bad in that. Good in the sense that it's flexible, it can adapt to many different circumstances. But if we project ourselves forward, or if we rather work backwards from a situation where not only big companies like mine, Amazon, but very small companies, SMEs, medium-sized companies, are going to try to operationalize and understand what compliance means for them, both with regards to that standard, but also various other standards, they're going to need a fair bit of help to be able to digest and understand what that means. And I think if we think of a scalable solution in due time, especially if we have a regulatory Damocletian sword, essentially, that is going to guarantee that everybody wants to get their certification if they're considered a high impact or a high risk AI application. You don't want the degree of time spent and of money spent for a startup to be essentially in the hundreds of thousands of dollars and many months, if not years, to be able to comprehend what compliance entails. And I think standards is a way of getting closer to the reality of many businesses, especially small businesses. I think ultimately schemas is a way of then interpreting those for specific use cases that again bring us a little bit closer to what conformity entails. Small startup may have been very, very successful in raising, say, $2.5 million for their Series A fundraising round. I think if right now you try to interpret the standards, which obviously haven't been published, but we can have a view of what they are likely to look like, and you try to kind of self-assess your certification against those standards, you're probably looking at a bill in the several hundreds of thousands of dollars, from a large accounting firm or other, to try to help you through that. And I think we need to come up with solutions that can scale and that can help those enterprises both know what to do and be able to achieve their compliance quicker and faster.
Yeah, Emmanuel, and you've been working with industry on a similar type of concept to a conformity assessment, a trust label. Can you speak to the work that you did and if that addresses anything that Marc-Etienne spoke about?
Yes. So as part of our role is that companies over time always approached us when new regulations come into place. Sometimes reacting to the regulation, sometimes preempting it. In this case, the AI Act was on its way, and a group of industrial actors approached VDE to say that, hey, there is this AI Act. We want to start thinking about compliance to it. We want to think about conformity to it. How should we go ahead with this? How should we approach this? And the difference here, I guess, because it's industry-led, it takes on a slightly different flavor to the traditional standards that are kind of led by notified bodies from different countries. Our trust label was funded by industry. This was the Bosch and Siemens and SAP and BAS. It originally started off as because the companies that approached us were mainly in Germany. It started off initially as an attempt to first of all dissect the AI Act, dissect the principles behind it, and kind of create this horizontal value-based kind of like trust standard around AI. As we went through the process of breaking apart the different sections of the legislation and what actually matters, and again, this is also one aspect of VDE being an association, is that we're always thinking about even though we're creating these standards for industry, always thinking about the consumer end. this guiding principle of always thinking about it from the end point of a European citizen means that even the way in which we kind of guide industry to think about the standards was that, yes, we have to adhere to the values that are laid out in the legislation. And this process, it took a while. It was through 3 years, but we ended up with initial version of, let's say, a trust label, a trust standard that on one hand maps the AI legislation onto a set of outcomes that companies can try to measure themselves against. And then on the other hand, we're and this is the thing that's happening in parallel, is then to map how industry talks specifically about AI compliance and the tool suites around it into the same. So we tried to create this common, almost like interface between the legislation and what is required there and what industry is comfortable speaking about, what the AI engineers within these companies understand, and just a simple translatory interface, basically. And within this interface, we captured at least as best as we could the values that are inherent and are required to be considered within the legislation. The difference with this approach here is that because it's industry-led, the industry feels like it's something that they can push forward, so to speak. It makes it somewhat less of a challenge because we're approaching it from their side, using the language they understand. And also there's this multi-year process of getting them familiar with exactly what compliance to the standard would look like. So now we have finished version 1 of the standard. It wasn't fully completed. We didn't iterate on all the outcomes of this value-based standard, but we put it out for industry to try out and give us feedback on what works and what doesn't work. Are some of these outcomes that you care about? Because, for example, the outcomes in the standard are divided out into, there's 5 of them: transparency, accountability, privacy, fairness, and reliability. And underneath them, there's several criteria, and all these criteria map to legislation, basically, for the most part. And so to actually get to a point where we know what actually works in the real world, we actually put it out there, let them test it and try it out and give us feedback. And then we do this multi-level discussion between what we're getting as feedback and the advice we're giving to the government, to the EU Commission about what's going on. And then we hope that in a way we can kind of stabilize in the middle ground. Now, the second version of this trust label, which is just about to kick off right now, we've expanded now to include a French consortium, which includes the likes of Thales and Volkswagen Group and Airbus, I believe. There's representatives of some fairly large French companies. And we're hoping to also expand that to include more, I guess, now that we have somewhat of a foundation, to include more players from the European sphere, and eventually to expand that to actually include more players from the overall global sphere. But it's good that at least initially to come to, when you're presenting this on a larger platform, to already come with something that kind of works, that we've, that we know that we have some results and some metrics to show to industry. Yeah. And then we hope that allows for easier adoption among other multinational corporates around the world.
Yeah, and I think to speak to some of the challenges around scalability and operationalization of these standards that Marc-Etienne spoke to, this multi-stakeholder approach does make a lot of sense. Florian, just to move to the work that you're doing with the AI Standards Hub, you took a similar approach to creating a significant amount of engagement with different stakeholders. Can you speak to that, and what were some of the main challenges that stakeholders had reported?
Yes, thank you. When we started working on the AI Standards Hub, the initial premise very much was the recognition that AI technologies, given their nature, given their sort of nature as a general purpose technology and the variety of their applications and their various potential impacts, that those technologies touch on the interest of quite a wide range of different stakeholder groups, as everyone I think on this call will be well aware. It's sort of a staple of our discussions, right? So they of course touch on the interests of developers and users, but also consumers, civil society, groups and advocates, regulators, policymakers, and so on and so forth. There was also the clear recognition, as we mentioned earlier, that standards as a governance tool are uniquely placed in many ways to capture the perspectives of all of these different stakeholder groups. So that was the starting point. And we then set out to understand, what's the current state of thinking and perception across different groups as it relates to the field of AI standardization. And that revealed a number of interesting things and very much shaped the mission of the AI Standards Hub. So one important finding, from the outset was there was a very strong shared recognition across all groups of the important role that standards can play as a governance tool and are set to play as a matter of fact. For example, as a result of developments such as the EU AI Act, which we know, is structured in a way such that standards at the European level will be key to shaping how the AI Act will be implemented. So very strong awareness of the fact that standards will play a key role, and that's important for organizations across all stakeholder groups to navigate that space and sort of actively participate in it. But at the same time, there was also a clear sense across many groups, at least, of a capability gap in the sense of the recognition of the importance of the topic, but limited experience in terms of engaging with standardization as a field. Now, of course, that differed to some extent between groups. We know that large, established technology companies, for example, have historical experience with standardization. But startups, for example, or SMEs who are new to entering a market may not be that well aware how standardization works and what different functions are that standards can play. Similarly, civil society, groups often have not engaged with standards in the past, depending on where they're coming from. Academic researchers often have limited awareness and engagement with standards, but we know that academic research perspectives can make an important contribution to shaping standards. And regulators also often have sort of limited historical engagement. It's very interesting to see how that differs between regulatory bodies. So in certain regulatory domains, such as medical devices, there is a significant history of engaging with standardization, but in many other areas, including areas that are particularly relevant to AI technologies, such as data protection, for example, there's limited or hardly any historical engagement from a regulatory side with standardization. So there's this capability gap. One clear finding related to that, and that was sort of encouraging given the mission of the AI Standards Hub, was there was a shared sense across all groups to want to shape standards rather than just engage with standards once they are published and sort of be a passive participant in the landscape. So all groups sort of recognized the fact that they had an important contribution to make in shaping the development of standards. But then again, there were significant challenges that stakeholders felt often were in the way of them becoming actively involved with AI standardization. And maybe it's worth to briefly mention sort of the three most prominent general categories of challenge that came out in our engagement. The first one was around access to comprehensive information about the AI standards landscape. Given that, as many are aware, there's quite a wide range of standards development organizations now working on AI, a large number of standards projects in each of them under development published, some of them horizontal, some of them focused on verticals. There was a sense among many that it's difficult to keep track, as it were, of what's happening in the AI standard space, what standards are currently under development, and then within that, equally difficult to determine which standards are relevant for my specific purposes. Say, if I'm a startup working on AI in health, what are the standards that I should be focusing on? So lack of accessible information. Secondly, an issue around skills. So given the limited experience, a lack or limited knowledge that is needed to effectively engage with this field. That included two areas: procedural knowledge in terms of, how does standardization work? How do I participate in a working group? How can I get certified for a standard? But also substantive knowledge around best practice. If I'm in the position of being on a working group for developing a standards for bias mitigation, what should that standard be saying? What is the current state of the art that should be reflected in the standard? And then thirdly, a need for strategic direction. So given that this rapidly and a rapidly growing field and complex field, what are the standards that are likely to be most impactful going forward? What are standardization priorities that a particular organization should focus on in dedicating their efforts? No one can be on all relevant working groups at the same time. Strategic direction in terms of what will be important for a particular organization or for a particular stakeholder group. So that's that's in a nutshell what we found in terms of challenges, and maybe I'll say a bit more later about how we're trying to address those challenges through the AI Standards Hub.
Great. Yes, we'll transition after this to then some of the best practices. Pierre, I'd love to hear from you in terms of the work that is underway at Standards Council of Canada, specifically related to the objectives of the AI Standards Collaborative. Similarly, you're doing multi-stakeholder engagement, but what I find very interesting is your international, the emphasis that you have on international collaboration and harmonization of standards, but also really to address some of the concerns that Emmanuel and Marc-Etienne raised with, again, back to that, how do you operationalize all of this different work that Florian spoke about, the different types of expertise? How does that all come together in conformity assessment schemes?
Okay, I'll try to summarize it. So, as you said, there's really two approaches that we've taken in Canada. The first one really resemble what Florian was talking about is the AI Standard Collaborative. So we have to bring all the different stakeholders from Canada. I mean, as you can imagine, each jurisdiction have to look at their own landscape and their own environment and try to make sense of this, and then make sense of the international component. So we're doing that in Canada. We've commissioned this multi-stakeholders forum to identify for Canada what are the AI standardization needs and priority, and to advance the development of and adoption of AI standardization solution for every Canadian stakeholders. They need to be involved as well in this. So the collaborative will in due course publish a roadmap to foster robust AI standardization system, which will increase consumer confidence, clarify technical requirements for developers and user, and enable commercialization of Canadian AI technology. So as Florian mentioned, in the past, we have to do a lot of different things, all things at the same time. We're basically building a bus, and we have to drive the bus at the same time, which is different than what we've used standard in the past. In the electricity situation, we develop electricity and then we develop the standards. In the case of AI right now, and many of the other important socio-economic agenda item across the world, we have to develop the standards at the same time that we're developing the technology, developing the research capacity, developing the commercial activities as well. So that's what we're doing from an AI multi-stakeholder collaboration, and this will lead to a roadmap for Canada that, as Ashley mentioned, we're also engaging a lot with UK, US, and other jurisdictions so that we can share, as we develop those knowledge and those information, we can share this information with others, and then we can try to integrate in an international component. The second aspect of what Canada is doing and our organization is developing AR conformity assessment program. So this program aims to develop an accreditation solution to bring clarity and structure to the AI industry in Canada. Given the lack of regulation in the AI field, the conformity assessment program will also help regulators address emerging AI concerns and challenges, hopefully shaping a very Canadian AI governance, which I'm sure will inspire us all today. So in the conformity assessment program, SCC is developing an innovative accreditation solution for AI management specific to support conformity assessment body in the future. So let me get a little bit more detail. This standards is critically, so when we're talking about the program will be based on the forthcoming international consensus standards for AI management system, the ISO IEC 42001 that Marc-Etienne mentioned earlier. So this standard is critically important to us all, as it will establish the first ever common benchmark for management system for AI sector. It will have an impact on the entire AI industry, which is why our organization is ensuring that the accreditation program is consistent with the standards and international effort. So in Canada, we are in partnership with the Departments of Innovation, Science, and Economic Development that has funded by the Canadian government and the Center for Regulatory Innovation, and SCC is conducting a pilot program this year to define and test the requirement of the AI management system conformity assessment program. So we are now, the program is now engaging with Canadian leadership and foresight in AI management. Ernst & Young has been confirmed as the compliance assessment organization for the first phase of the pilot, and the Alberta Treasury branches has been confirmed as the organization on the ongoing certification. So this will, we're piloting this. This will give us real life example or how this would work in the world, and hopefully we will gain knowledge that we could apply to the future experimentation that we will have to do as well. That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Pierre. And we're really excited at the Responsible AI Institute to participate in that pilot project and understand the relationship between management system standards and product standards and how those fit together. So I think that's a really good way for us to transition then into some of the best practices that all of you have seen and some of the work that you have under development within your organizations. It's really great to hear about these pilot initiatives. Marc-Etienne, I'll go to you first. Can you speak to some of the work that Amazon's thinking about in terms of adopting those practices, addressing some of those challenges that you spoke about earlier?
I can try. So, I mean, one big challenge, I don't know if this is so much a best practice, but I'll segue to a best practice right after. One big challenge is that there is a huge patchwork, as Florian mentioned before, of various standards being launched around various aspects of AI/ML, right? There's even competing risk management frameworks and so on. I think that's really too bad in the sense that there's so much work to be done still in filling out the right standards that we'll need to be able to go forward, that kind of duplicative work is to me unnecessary. The other thing is that kind of purely national standards, which I know this is not the SCC's objective, but I've seen in other jurisdictions that kind of, aren't paying much attention to what's happening within ISO or within kind of international standardization bodies. I don't know how useful that's going to be in the long run. Like, I don't know that we need like a huge patchwork of standards that are different in different countries. Really, we're trying to work towards having as interoperable a system as we can with various regulatory approaches in different countries, right? So I think the biggest challenge we have is just figuring out what that layout is of the right standards that we feel are likely to gain a ton of international traction. And so there's a shortcut to figuring that out, because there is luckily a handy working group within ISO with support of the Commission that essentially maps standards that it sees as likely to be adopted as harmonized standards with regards to the EU AI Act. So we at least at minimum know that those standards are going to have a certain degree of weight a high degree of weight with regards to which ones that we will need to be able to demonstrate compliance. So first effort that we need to do in-house is just map out what compliance is likely going to look like, and that requires understanding which standards are we supposed to be looking at to map out our compliance. As you can imagine, we're a fair-sized company. We have a lot of different product lines and services and offerings. Some of that compliance is about us, so how we go about shaping up our compliance. But the bigger question is, as I mentioned earlier, is how we shape it up for the thousands of customers that operate on the back end of AWS. And that's really about determining how we scale a shared responsibility model between us as, in most circumstances, a developer of underlying technology that other companies are deploying by then adding their own intellectual property on top. How likely or how possible will it be that those customers are going to be able to certify their products by themselves without having all of the right information that they require from us to be able to then, do what they need to do to obtain their certification? We need to figure that out, and it's not a straightforward process. It needs to be untangled, almost standard by standard and requirement by requirement, and that's part of the work that we're trying to do right now. And again, those need to be scalable solutions. What I find as a huge challenge is when I see pilot projects presented in various circumstances, often they talk about, well, it was a 6-8 month engagement. We had 4 lawyers on each side that worked on it. We spent whatever this number of thousands of hours after signing several NDAs. That's not a scalable solution, right? That can't be where we're at in 2 to 3 years. So we're trying to figure out ways that we can scale, ways that we can automate, ways that we can be as collaborative of a partner as we can be, but in a way that's also realistic to how that can actually happen in a successful way.
Thank you. And Pierre, I'm going to turn back to you quickly because I think that some of the work that is happening with the AI Standards Collaborative is related to some of the work that was happening with the Data Standards Collaborative. So trying to also recognize from a scalability perspective how you can build off of those 2 different but related initiatives could be a great practice for others to learn from.
Yeah, so just to give a brief summary, in the Data Collaborative, so we had this a couple of years ago, and we came up with 35 recommendations, some of which specifically address issue related to AI. So we're not starting from scratch with the AI Collaborative. We are hoping to build on the work that we've done before, and this should give us a heads up in this area. The other thing, like I mentioned earlier, at the same time that we're doing our internal national effort on AI, we're also engaging in bilateral and multilateral collaboration with different countries, different jurisdictions, so that as we develop our own knowledge, we can share with those. Marc-Etienne, just to address, I fully understand with you that we are trying to avoid the patchwork of having this country develop their things, this other country. Yes, we need to have those the international standards organization be looked at and try to harmonize the standards. The big challenge is that different jurisdictions will have different legislation to try to regulate AI and how it applies in their country. And we know that the legislation, the standard should be the same, but the legislation will be very different and could be very different, and something could be conflicting. So at the same time that we don't want to duplicate, I believe that every country or many different jurisdictions, they need to go through this process to map the standards with the regulation or the proposed regulation that they are thinking of implementing. So it is a painful process because, as I said, we're trying to do this at the same time, but I think it is necessary, and hopefully there'll be enough collaboration and communication between the main jurisdictions so that at the end we'll come up with different options, different where, but we'll also have the interoperability. I have difficulty with this word. The interoperability between the different jurisdictions. So we know they are different, but we have a proposal or a path forward to make them interconnected.
Yeah, if I could just really quickly say a couple words about that. I fully understand and agree with that. And there's plenty of work to be done right now, so it makes a ton of sense that numerous different bodies are just trying to generate as much content and doing the fact-finding work that you're doing, for instance, with the pilot that you talked about. That's super necessary for us to get to the next stage. And then there's venues like the Trade and Technology Council between the EU and the US, where in the leaked draft of their meeting that is forthcoming, that for some reason is already available. They already have a roadmap for collaboration between standards initiatives on AI between the EU and the US, at least with regards to trying to work on risk categorization and interoperable definitions of things like risk and harm and so on. I just think it's hyper key that as many countries as possible within kind of values-aligned nations, which I think largely are represented in this setting, try to participate in those venues to try to make sure that while we have the ability to modulate for some national differences, largely we're relying upon the same underlying standards.
Yeah, Emmanuel, do you want to add to that?
So it's interesting to hear this current discussion, because this is something that we faced very early on when we were putting together the trust label. You have a lot of the organizations we're working with do sell internationally, so they're actually thinking about if they're thinking about developing a standard, they're thinking about something that can actually work under different regulatory regimes, but still remains aligned with, for example, let's say, the values that are imposed within, or at least alluded to within the AI Act. So with regard to this, it's important to kind of like situate, like, I guess, where the trust level kind of sits and why it sits there, and specifically why it was designed in the way it was, so that it can allow for the flexibility, let's say, among regulatory regimes, among different products. So the trust label, when you look at the challenge of creating, let's say, a trust standard as trust label, especially with a focus on something that it can be uniformly agreed on, at least within Europe, we found that itself was already a challenge, because again, within VDE we house GPAI, which is the national standards body for Germany, and even then, even internally, there was a problem just creating conformity and agreeing on things there. So what ended up happening is that we elevated the standards label, at least to the way it's almost like a small data sheet that kind of quickly, from our point of view, communicates the properties of a system across value, according to these values, but underneath it, what actually underpins, let's say, this. So to be concrete, the five different outcomes, let's say, that we measure: transparency, accountability, they're measured A to G, like as you see for your energy efficiency ratings that you find on all your products. But what we decided to do was that underneath what underpins that A to G rating changes depending on application, depending on regulatory regime. Just like you have the same kind of like label for a fridge and a light bulb and a house, but the standards that underpin them country to country, product to product, are different, and they do change over time at different frequencies. And so abstracting to that level and trying to create alignment on that level is allowed for quite a bit more traction. It's still a huge challenge, I'd agree, but it at least then allows for the autonomy of different regions who might have, let's say, strong divergences in particular, let's say, values that they care about. But still, at the end of the day, allows for some way to communicate properties of systems, AI systems especially. And since we're looking at a whole life cycle, whole product approach, consistently across the European market at least, and hopefully across the world. So that's my contribution to that current discussion. But we did have similar discussions for a while.
No, I think it's really helpful. So thank you for that. And Florian, not that you necessarily have the answers to all of these things, but as you can imagine, a lot of the multi-stakeholder discussions that you had in development of the AI Standards Hub were about the harmonization of these standards, interoperability between regions, but also then comparability, so that from system to system, the consumer knows that the same type of evaluation was done. Are these some of the challenges that you were able to tackle or are on the roadmap for the AI Standards Hub?
Yes, so they're all challenges that we are tackling. I'm not sure we have, completed that. We certainly haven't completed the work yet, and we've only just started the journey. So the AI Standards Hub launched about a month ago, but we have a plan for how we intend to tackle many of those challenges. And in a nutshell, to summarize, what we're trying to do is, at a high level, going back to the different challenges that I mentioned earlier, is really a focus on stakeholder empowerment to actively navigate and contribute to AI standardization as a field. That includes empowering stakeholders to be actively involved in developing standards, but then of course making informed use of standards that have been published, and alongside give strategic direction to the field. And very much with the view of resonating with everything that's been said, with a view to promoting coherence and convergence rather than ending up with fragmentation. So I think it's encouraging to see the shared awareness of the importance of that goal between all of us, and hopefully we will, by working together, make progress in achieving that. Now, concretely, in terms of how we are pursuing our mission, there are 4 pillars that I'll just briefly mention. The first pillar is what we are calling the observatory function. So, and I should mention that as part of our work, we've developed a new online platform, which I'd like to invite anyone who's interested to visit. The website is aistandardshub.org, and that's really an important backbone for a lot of our work. So on the website, there'll be an observatory, which consists of a couple of different databases. One database to track standards under development and published standards, and then another database to track relevant policy developments, so regulatory initiatives such as the AI Act, and then an objective to link those things together and be able to map out how standards relate to different regulatory developments. The second component is around community building, so bringing stakeholders together to have joined up conversations across different groups. We'll do that partly through the website. There are discussion forums, there are functions to let other users know if you're involved in a standards working group, to allow other users to connect with you, and various other features. But then there'll be live events as well to bring stakeholders together. Thirdly, training and capacity building. We have a growing range of e-learning materials that's available through our website to sort of convey the knowledge needed to be active in standards development. Again, I'd invite everyone who's interested to take a look at those materials. And then lastly, there is the research and analysis function, which is meant to address this need for strategic direction, help shed light on, and very much speaking to some of the questions that Pierre mentioned, shed light on, given the sort of the setup of the AI industry in the UK, the sectors that are dominant there, what are the standardization needs that emerge in the UK? How do they relate to what's happening internationally? Are there particular gaps where UK expertise can make a particular contribution? But then conversely, of course, what can we learn from what's happening internationally? And so overall, I'll conclude by saying that, of course, it's a UK initiative. Part of our function, as Pierre mentioned, for the Standards Collaborative, is to bring together UK stakeholders, but at the same time, at the core of our mission is a spirit of international collaboration and enabling, international conversations, and very much interested, in exploring how we can collaborate with similar initiatives in other countries to pursue those objectives.
Great, thank you so much. We're reaching the end of the hour, and I just really wanted to take this opportunity to thank everybody for their knowledge, sharing that with this GPAI audience, as well as contributing some ideas on how we can all move forward as a collective. I was hoping to get to some takeaways for the audience, and we had so much to share we didn't get there, but I would encourage everybody to follow each of the panelists through their respective channels. Florian's mentioned how you can connect to the Standards Hub. I understand, Pierre, that AI Standards Collaborative is going to be launching a website soon. And Emmanuel, I believe that VDE has information available through their website on the trust label, and hopefully people can follow you on social media and find out more information about that. Thank you again to all of you. And really, I think that it seems like we're at the start of this conversation. We've put forward a lot of challenges. We have some work underway, but we can probably have this discussion again next year to see the progress that's been made and the outcome of some of those pilots, and hopefully address some of the common concerns around scalability and operationalization of this. So with that, I'd love to conclude the panel today. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you to GPAI for hosting this really important discussion.
And a special shout out to our panelists who are up at 3 a.m. To talk about standards.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Merci. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.